We have now reached almost the end of our program today. This is a very final panel. At the very beginning of this summit, we spoke about the importance of justice, and then we looked at how education and governance and justice intersect. In the afternoon, we've discussed the intersectionality of how young people are involved in politics, and now we want to see how to bridge the gap between grassroots and governance. So, to bring us to a close, we have Rosebel Kagumiro, who is coming back onto the stage. And she's going to be, together with her panel, exploring the challenges of achieving sexual and reproductive health rights on the continent. And guess what? For the very first time today, we have men on the panel. Representation matters, huh?
I'm back. Did you know that? I'll be back. I'm here. And I've been given Mission Impossible to really wrap this day with a fantastic panel. We have very few minutes, and I hope that my panelists will pardon me where I'll push a little bit. We are finishing our day looking at accountability, and this is accountability for sexual and reproductive health and rights. So you wonder, why this topic? Why now? It's very important. I don't know where you might be, but I'm sure you all know we are in the kind of middle of a pushback, what we see a lot of moral panic about women being empowered, about girls having rights, and that moral panic is having repercussions on our policies, on our lives. And I think one feminist scholar, activist, said that feminism can be for everybody, but until we address reproductive justice, which is at the heart of our autonomy, our bodily autonomy, then we actually would lose all the other rights. So it doesn't matter if you can vote, it doesn't matter if you can go to school, but if you cannot control what happens to your body, then what is the use of all these other rights? So that's why it's very, very important to come back to the personhood, to come back to what is happening in the world, on the continent. And we've seen a lot of governments coming up, a lot of populist politics flying around, and we need to be able to be prepared on how do we fight for that. Not just as women's rights activists, not just as politicians, but this is a societal survival issue for people to live with dignity. So to explore this topic with me, I have a great panel. I'll call on Tabitha Sawoyo Griffith. It's my honor. I've known her work a bit. She's the managing director of East Africa Legal Service Network. Welcome, Tabitha. And next, it will be executive director of Athena Network. We have already known Athena Network to do incredible things. So could you please join us, Olaoluwa Abagun. You're welcome. Then next, since we've already been told we are going to have men on the panel, and this is not just ordinary men, but really people who have been supporting the fight for our rights, and it's very important. We are going to hear from Honorable Dr. Matthew Ngwale. He's the Member of Parliament from all the way from Malawi. Honorable Ngwale, please take a seat. Last but not least, back at home in Kenya, we would like to be joined by Irungu Hutun, Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. You're welcome, Irungu. I've known Irungu for a while. We're all in the trenches of this fight. So you're welcome. You're all welcome. This is quite a heavy topic, you know, heavy times. And I'll go straight to you. Tabitha, would you really look into this? I've already introduced this a little bit, but this is your daily work. This is the struggle. So just take a few minutes to tell us about the current landscape of sexual reproductive health and rights, not just in Kenya, but on the continent. What are we dealing with? And what are the major contestations? And how do we build power together, really, to win this struggle? Thank you.
Thanks for that, Rosebell. I am going to start with 2 caveats. Number 1, I am truly apologetic to the people who are seated behind me. I feel it's very disrespectful that my back is turned to them. But I'm hoping that once in a while I'm going to turn and wink at you just to show solidarity. Number 2, I am also going to apologize to colleagues from Francophone speaking and Lusophone speaking Africa, because everything that I'm going to share is from an Anglophone speaking, data, and that is also something that I acknowledge, and it's a bias. But coming back to your question, Rosebell, around what is the context that we have currently on sexual and reproductive rights in Africa, I'm going to share a very quick story and just with facts and datas. 27th June 2023, in Eldoret, in a place called Kapsoya here in Kenya, police launched a manhunt for a 21-year-old girl who was suspected to have procured an unsafe abortion. On 19th June 2023, police arrested a 16-year-old in a place called Bomet for having an unsafe abortion without challenging the issue of why a 16-year-old had been defiled. In the same month of June, on 6th June, the DPP proudly tweeted how they had arrested a medical provider who had offered safe abortion services to a 16-year-old in Mombasa. In this same June, in Zambia, a 20-year-old girl is being arrested and prosecuted by the name Evelyn Horn for being found to have procured an unsafe abortion in the dormitories. In this same year, non-governmental organizations that work on LGBTQ and unsafe abortion have been evicted in Uganda from their tenancy agreements. In this same year, we have had NGO coordination boards summoning, both in Kenya and Uganda, groups that are either registered as NGOs or community-based organizations, simply for tweeting things that were said not to be African values. In this same year, we have had in Kenya the raid of a safe house known as Usikimye in Kiambu, just because they were sheltering a trans woman. What we have seen in Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, Namibia, is a rise of homohysteria, passionately driven not by Africans, but from a group that is outside of Africa. We have seen people clamoring for the death of African sons and daughters. We have seen people who look like me, who speak like me, people who are representatives of Africa, clamoring for a death penalty for our own, asking that we kill our own. But in the same context, in Kenya, we currently have an assisted reproductive technology, ART and surrogacy bill, that if passed, would allow women to have access to reproduction of children through other means without the natural means that we clamor for. In this same era, we have an intersex bill here in Kenya that, if it passes, would recognize all the struggles of intersex persons and persons who have for the longest time been invisible. We currently also have at the East Africa community a sexual and reproductive bill, which was just saved last week by the IALA legislature. We also have brave judiciaries in Kenya that recognize that the Supreme Court, and I want to give a shout out to the Kenyan judiciary right now for recognizing the right of the National Gay, Lesbian, Human Rights Commission to be registered, the freedom of association. That courage has also been seen in Namibia. It has also been seen in Botswana several years ago in 2019. It has also been seen in Swaziland. But with that same courage has been a punishment, either through threats to budget cuts, either through threats, through parliament, indicating how they were going to punish the judiciary for overstepping their mandate. That same courage has come at a price. The long and short of what is the ecosystem currently is that we are at a war. It might not be the equivalent of the war that we have seen in Ethiopia or Sudan, but our bodies are at war right now. And it's a new Cold War, a war that has to be fought using every single breath that we have in terms of access to, in terms of recognizing bodily autonomy, etc. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Coming from Uganda, it's madness. Every day you wake up, you don't know what's going to be thrown out here in the kind of things coming from our parliament. You know, it's just disheartening. We also have seen moves in countries like Senegal to try to pressure parliament to come up with all these laws about targeting LGBTQ people. And so far, some parliamentarians have held forth and say, you're not going to bring this law that is going to fill our jails with our own citizens for nothing and spreading hate. So there's a couple of, you know, resistance blocks we are seeing even in the middle of this. I'll jump to you, Ola. I'm struggling. Olaoluwa, I'll come to you because Athena Network works across this continent. I would like us to hear from you. What have you been finding in your activism, and where should we be putting our focus?
Yes, thanks, Rose. So last year, we were actually bothered by the fact that, at Athena, we were bothered by the fact that all of the, or majority of the data around sexual and reproductive health, which really affects adolescent girls and young women on the continent, were either, you know, produced by multilateral institutions, you know, academicians, without the voices of adolescent girls and young women at the core of it. And that's an issue, because we would not really see the full picture of the situation without those who are most involved, who are most affected, being at the center of that. And so that led us to co-launch a project, She Learns, with ARASA. And through that project, we've been working in 5 countries, Kenya, Namibia, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, with young women to co-create feminist and participatory research around the context of sexual and reproductive health. And while it was great to have young women, you know, leading that work, leading feminist research, the findings were not great. So across the spectrum of access to sexual and reproductive health, adolescent pregnancy, a lot of crazy pictures were painted in the baseline reports that they released. So just to highlight some of those things, we saw with respect to contraception, in terms of the stagnation that we continue to face, guardians are still in denial that young people are sexually active. And in this century, in 2023, that's a big problem, because that spirals to, you know, lack of access. You find health facilities saying that they would only serve youth with the consent of their parents, and that's just bizarre. That's counterproductive. And that's something we need to keep speaking up about young people's agency in accessing contraception and other sexual and reproductive health services. And then we come to comprehensive sexuality education. We know that that has been a really hot topic over the past few years. The countries that are offering comprehensive sexuality education are doing it from an abstinence-based perspective, and some even a fear-inducing perspective, right? Teaching about sexuality from a standpoint of fear. We see that across all of the countries we were working in, both in Kenya, in Namibia, in Zimbabwe. Adolescent pregnancy as well is really high. In Kenya here, we were able to see that about 27.4% of adolescent girls are have experienced pregnancy during adolescence. In Zimbabwe, it's even worse, 86 pregnancies in every 1,000 girls. We still come to the point of child marriage, which we're all very familiar with. We still have conflicting laws around child marriage. Age of consent is 18, but you see some laws, like for instance in Tanzania, saying 15-year-olds can marry with parental consent. And that's just really ridiculous. Even from FGM and female genital cutting, female genital mutilation, and even labia elongation in Zimbabwe, these things still go on, and there's a lot of misinformation, and everybody is just really overwhelmed. There's one thing we're forgetting in the grand spectrum of, gender-based violence. A lot has been said here about gender-based violence today. But what that research uncovered was that violence against queer people, queer women in particular, such as corrective rape, is still, feminist organizations, some women's rights organizations are turning a blind eye to that. And that is very, very dangerous. I have to borrow the words of Burna Boy here. Last, everybody go chop breakfast. Because if we say we are overlooking the violence that our queer siblings are experiencing, then when they come for us, there will be nobody to speak up. And truly, it goes round, right? It's not something all of us can escape. So everybody's human rights are fully valid, and we should all stand behind it. But it's not all doom and gloom. Very quickly, I also want to highlight some of the key wins that we saw in that research. We saw that Kenya was the first sub-Saharan country to meet the policy goal of contraceptive access. So at least that's a win in terms of achieving a policy goal. We saw some programs in Namibia, Be Free and Dreams programs, which are quite progressive in terms of comprehensive sexuality education, some of them using online instruments to also disseminate comprehensive sexuality education. And then in 2021, and more recently with the Sierra Leonean government, outside of the countries of our research, but that's also a win to highlight, right, with the radical transformation that they made, ensuring that pregnant girls are able to return to school and not face discrimination and stigmatization. But as we say, we move. In the midst of all of these challenges, let's celebrate the wins and let's continue to speak up to reverse the challenges.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding us of these particular wins. I must add that we actually, last 2 years, we've had quite progress. For example, Benin passed a very progressive law on abortion, decriminalizing abortion. So it was one of those highlights to see a country move forward. We've also seen countries like Cameroon having, education policy that is allowing girls to come back to school after they're pregnant. Really, we're seeing some of those and some governments moving because of the sheer number of much violence that happened in the pandemic. But outside that, we also see on LGBTQ rights, we've seen a couple of African countries move to decriminalize, to move to a certain stage of decriminalization of LGBTQ individuals and communities. And we're seeing the great role of judiciary, because as we see in the midst of this, and I'm coming to Honorable Ngwale, we have seen that the parliament in Africa is supposed to be upholding the will of the people, hijacking the will of the people, manipulating the will of the people, and making certain topics to be really from a extreme conservatism that is sweeping across the continent, and the parliament's at the heart of it, and it puts the judiciaries in our continent become the last bastion of our, we were putting our eyes on the judiciary, because if the parliamentarians are debating this, and this is the level of debate, then we are all eyes on the judiciary. So I would like to come to you, maybe from your experience from Malawi parliament, but also convening with the parliamentarians from the continent. What's happening?
Yeah, thank you so much, convener, for that one. I will speak a lot more about my country, because that's what I know most. My country is a very conservative country. And one of the problems we have is unsafe abortions. There is so much unsafe abortions. In fact, when I go into my constituency and have a meeting, almost each and every female in the crowd, including very young girls, 12, 15, they'll have a baby at the back of at their back, which is a very, very worrying situation. And every month, we have about 140 cases of unsafe abortions reporting in hospitals. And every month, we have 1,000 girls dying from unsafe abortions. These are very worrying statistics. And what surprises me most is that whenever the NGO community is working on issues like this, they normally go to countries where things are much better. They don't come to my country where things are seriously bad. I want to know why. Because even when it comes to aid, you find that countries that want to aid poor countries, they go and give a lot more aid to countries that are all right. When they come to a country that is very, very poor, they will give very little aid. That is what surprises me. And therefore, those of us who are in here, take this one, that Malawi is in a very, very serious situation. Our women are dying every day. When I talk about 1,000, every month, you can imagine. And nothing is being done. Why are we not doing anything? Our problem is politics. Members of parliament have been approached by NGOs to change the law so that women can be protected. But members of parliament are worried about traditional leaders in their areas. They are worried about religious leaders in their areas because they will campaign them and they will never come back to parliament. Political parties are also worried because they don't want to be the political party that legalized abortion. So if a member of parliament stands up and starts supporting the abortion laws, the party can easily dismiss that member of parliament. Now, for me, I've been in the university all my life. I've been teaching, so I took politics just recently. And one thing which I wanted to change is this one. I said, I'm going to fight. Lucky enough, I went to parliament as an independent member. Therefore, no party can dismiss me. And therefore, I stood for the abortion laws. I managed to get the discussion to parliament. I managed even to get the president of the country to talk about abortion in the country. So we have managed to do that. But the party made sure that that issue should not pass. Why? Because they don't want to be the party that legalized abortion. So the day when I was supposed to present, people who were supposed to second me ran away, and there was a motion moved in parliament not to discuss the issue. And that's where we are at the moment. But what I can say is we need to still fight, sensitize the population. I told the NGOs in the country, as a committee of parliament, that look here, what should happen is you should generate the need for this law to be changed. The people in the village don't understand. When a girl dies from abortion, it is sudden death. And sudden death in our area is witchcraft. If a person dies suddenly and people can't explain, she has been bewitched. Now, we must make these people, the villagers, understand that some of these deaths actually are due to abortion. And that's the situation we are in Malawi. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being this elaborate to understand the different dynamics in different countries. Oftentimes, you know, the information we have is not the same, but also that communities are not the same. There's an example which was very interesting in Uganda. One of the organizations was working on abortion and what was happening in the communities. They found a community where the police came to arrest a girl for abortion, and the community ganged up and chased the police. It's very important to understand that different communities have different values on the continent, and the question of African values becomes disintegrated there, that there's no one African value, and the communities have always also fought for their own. So this imposed politicization of bodies of women is something that is happening actively, and sometimes the communities don't know where this information is coming from, but it has been slow to erode the communities' responses that they would have done years before is not the same because there's someone saying arrest people and do this. So Irunga, I'm going to come to you. The fact that when we talk about sexual and reproductive rights, for a long time this has remained like a women's only issue to be tackled by women's rights organizations, and it's sometimes difficult to bring the conversation when we're talking about civil liberties, but for us as feminists, the personal is political, there is no separation. So what can we do to really see organizations, civil society organizations and other organizations coming to make sexual and reproductive rights, actually, the defense of sexual and reproductive rights? Because as we heard, it's not, people don't just come to erode sexual and reproductive rights, they come to take every other right. We've seen it, the struggle is not just we're coming for this, they always come for more. So I would like to hear your perspectives on that.
So thank you very much, Rosebell, and good afternoon, everybody, and happy birthday to Nala, and just thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to commune, to strategize, and really to get energy from the continent. So back, when I came out of university, I suspected that democratic development, accountable governance, and a just societies was impossible without dismantling patriarchy and transforming power and privilege. It was a time when we reeled from the 71 rapes and the 19 deaths that occurred in a secondary school called St. Kizito. And it was my awakening moment, right? And I came to that conclusion that patriarchy was essentially really one of the obstacles to democratic development. Several years on, perhaps a few 30 years on, I now realize that rising Christian and Islamic fundamentalism is dangerous, exclusive capitalism is toxic, and patriarchy is acidic. And that our silence, collectively or individually, will not keep any one of us safe. Sexism, ableism, ageism, racism, and a word that I like to use now, not homophobia, but heterosexism, all the isms have one thread. And that thread is the desire to destroy the autonomy and the independence of human beings and those people that we think are different from us. So if anybody in this room or anybody listening to us feels that they can ignore one ism or the other, let me invite you to check your privilege. You will find it is not coincidental that you are able to excuse heterosexism, or you are able to excuse ageism or ableism, but you will not excuse sexism. It comes from one root. So there are some men who fear independent women. They have an idea that they can be entitled to women's bodies, and being rejected for many of my brothers, my sons, my fathers, is deeply troubling. Heterosexual people desperately and very vainly cannot understand that love, that marriage, and the choices that come with family could be different for them, for the others. Abled people ignore and scorn those who think, move, or don't see or see in ways that they do. So I hope the point is being made clear that actually there is there's a connectedness that we cannot disconnect and take on individually. So whether it is the prejudice and the violence that we saw in Shakahola, where close to 400 people of faith can be hoodwinked into committing, having fasting and committing suicide, or whether it is hate laws that can be introduced by parliamentarians supported by Western evangelical parties and businesses and NGOs, for that matter, to criminalize LGBTQ people, or whether it is that we are able to walk into buildings and not challenge the buildings because they do not allow sisters like Waja to be able to walk and step into these spaces like everybody else. We have to check our own privilege. Allow me to come to the next part of that question, which is, how are we doing? According to Civicus, there were something like 12,500 protests that took place over last year. Many of those protests were economic, they were fiscal related, they were to do with the cost of living. But quite a few of them were to do with identity-based discrimination. And I think one of the things we have as a responsibility, as an obligation to the last generation, to women like Michere Mugo, to women like Amat Aidu, to women like Bessie Head and their male allies, is to ensure that the rights and the freedoms that they gave us cannot be taken away in this generation. And that our children will not have a worse plate to work from than we have had. So wherever I see resistance, wherever I see points of protest, I take heart. Whether it be Maasai women challenging a Maasai nominated member of parliament, Tuyala, for advertising a retreat that he owns on the basis that there is a nest that does not allow people, women particularly, he said, to come out of, because in theory, or in his argument, men have paid for them to stay there. Or when I see the Finnish economic minister being forced to resign after just 1 week of service because 3 years ago he said that the best way to deal with climate change is actually to encourage abortion across Africa. Now, we might agree with him that actually safe abortion is a right and needs to be introduced on demand by states. But we will probably disagree on the other part of that. So I think what we have to do is think a little bit about strategically the indivisibility of our struggles, the intersectionality of our issues, and actually how do we take practical action to do the kind of work that gave us the freedoms and the rights to be able to join and be here today. And that, I think, is essentially our task. We have to organize. We have to look for the people who disagree with us but agree with us on other issues. We have to reach across to parliamentarians. We have to support you to create the political movement that allows you to be able to stand firmly in parliament and not be ignored. Or Zuleka to be able to speak out in a way that she is able to do without any sense of fear. Or not have to learn karate in order to be able to walk publicly. That's what happens when mass organizing takes place. Now, mass organization without policy is also futile. Because if we are not changing the policies, the instruments of power, the institutions, the resources and way that they're being moved, like we have seen the judiciary do this week here in Kenya, then we are not making the difference that we need to make. And we will not be able to institutionalize the kind of changes we need to make. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And the point of policy is very important. I'll come to you briefly. Tell us, Tabitha, you know, this year is the 20th anniversary of the Maputo Protocol. And in the midst of all this, actually the protocol is a very forward-looking document from 2003, right? And here we are, all countries trying to threaten to withdraw from the very document that has given us opportunity to expand our rights. I wanted to hear from you about this moment of the Maputo Protocol and what are the other opportunities to build power and push back and get the policies we need.
Thanks for that. I'm going to test this mic because we exchanged mics and I told her this one is working. You just have to do a long press. For those of you who are students of African Union, African Commission, you know that one of the things that we are praised for as a continent, in addition to the beautiful things that I had Dr. Pumzule say, in every footnote when she was doing her PhD, she would quote Kenya. Maputo Protocol is celebrated worldwide for being not only the only document that recognizes bravely under Article 14 things like access to safe abortion, but one of the most progressive documents that goes over and above even the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination at the UN. One of the things that has happened is that we need to not make the assumptions that we made when Roe v. Wade for many years was standing. And all of us said, we are protected, we are enjoying the benefits of Roe v. Wade. If you had told me 10 years ago that I would be now questioning whether Maputo Protocol really will stand the true test of time in the next 10 years, I would have said it is going to. However, what I have seen is the intentionality of fundamentalist groups to reverse back, to claw back. We are now looking at a USA that does not have the protections of Roe v. Wade. we are now seeing an organized group of fundamentalists in Africa that have decided to challenge Maputo Protocol. So before I celebrate it, I want to send an alarm to all of us, to NALA, to the council members of NALA who stand here and who have power in every country, to everyone who is here as a representative of their country, that the clamor is not for us to close our eyes and continue saying we are protected by the blood of Jesus and Maputo Protocol. This is the time for us to ensure that if we're going to do the movement building that we wanted to, that Irungu has challenged us to do, it's to protect and safeguard the Maputo Protocol with all our blood, sweat, and tears. Because we are seeing increasingly incitements that as we celebrate 20 years of Maputo, there are certain people who are planning that one of the things that they can do, which is allowed in the law, is to make amendments to the Maputo Protocol. The Entebbe Declaration, for those of you who do not know, was a combination and a culmination of 36 members of parliament in April 2023 who went to Entebbe, sat together, met with President Museveni, and agreed that the next steps they're going to do is challenge two protocols. One, ACP-EU Treaty, that is the African, Caribbean, Pacific EU Treaty, and two, to contest the place of Maputo Protocol. Maputo Protocol was signed at a point historically. Those of you who have been SOA sisters who know that we did not have any female president in Africa back then, right? And therefore, at that point, I had every single faith that our men who at the African Union stood with us. This is the time that I'm asking everyone to go back home and really think around the strategy for your countries not to pull out of Maputo Protocol, for introductions not to be made, for the African Commission not to be weakened, because these are the plans and plots that we are seeing from those who are at the Entebbe Declaration moment.
Thank you so much, Tabitha. This is very, very important. Very, very important. Because we are living in a time of polarization. We are seeing a struggle on the continent, lack of leadership, but also the faltering Pan-Africanism. And this is the document that has come from the sweat of Pan-Africanism. So, but we see countries going it alone, listening to my president listening to a family network from America of white people who are here to take my rights and will never listen to me. And this is what we are looking at. So it's very, very important that we know that the struggle is beyond our colonial borders, right? That we need to stick together. So I wanted to come to you about working on the continent and building this power. We have known, no one has known much about this, that progress is not linear, that you can be raised in no minute than African women who fought for independence and we've been fighting, yet we haven't even got even a quarter of that national cake, right? So how are you, Athena Network and young feminists on the continent, building this power to make sure we can really have something to show for the next generation?
Yes, and that's really important, right? Because our journey is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You know, people before us, Madame Pumzile was saying here that we're having these conversations in 2023 that we've had over the years. And it simply means that we need to keep asking ourselves, what can we do better? What new strategies can we apply? One thing that we always talk about at Athena is really sharing power. And that's a core feminist principle that we always try to remain true to. So, you know, no speaking, there's no such thing as, you know, a silenced voice. It's either you have deliberately chosen not to hear the voices, or, you know, for some of you are protecting your interests by silencing others. No voice is, you know, just automatically silenced. So trying to bridge that gap by ensuring that particularly adolescent girls and young women always, always, always have a seat at the table in determining policies, in designing programs, in funding, trusting that young women and adolescent girls can really take this movement forward and can speak for their rights really boldly. Another thing is intersectionality, and we've been talking about it so much, and sometimes some things can get talked about and become such buzzwords that you forget to apply them and look at what it means in reality. So for instance, when we talk about the full body of sexual and reproductive health and rights, the adolescent girls and young women who participated, in the research told us that young women living with disability are not seen as sexual beings. They go to healthcare facilities and they're laughed at, like, you want to access, you want contraceptives, really, and it's damning, because we have to look at disability, we have to look at people who live in rural areas. HIV and AIDS is not over. We have over 4,500 young girls contracting HIV, fresh cases every week. So it's a case of trying to apply all of these intersecting lenses as we design our programs, as we approach solutions. Then the third is definitely self-care. And we've started talking about this today, but it's really important. And it's something we try to remind ourselves as a movement. You can't pour from an empty cup. And if we keep running towards the goal without stopping back to care for each other individually and collectively, we just might lose steam before we see the change we want to see. So these are really important new strategies that we can continue to implement as we work towards the changes that we want to see.
Thank you so much. Coming back to you, Dr. Ngwale, because it's very, very important to really stem this movement to erode our rights with the evidence-based policy and lawmaking, and that is seen to be dwindling on the continent when we could look at the girls that are having, how many people having abortions and intended pregnancies, being the continent with the highest number of intended pregnancies and the highest number of deaths with unsafe abortions. How do we bring back our policy-making frameworks to really respond in a way that relates to realities, through evidence, not emotional or religious leanings that we are seeing?
Yes, thank you so much. I feel, as I said earlier on, that as long as we keep forgetting the person for whom these laws are meant, we will continue to make mistakes. For example, if you look at the anti-abortion, the churches in our country have organized themselves already, that at every sitting of parliament, they will come to parliament and shower money to members of parliament to make sure that they shouldn't vote for this bill. The issue of LGBTs in Uganda has spread, and the religious people are now coming to parliament already. It's as if somebody had already moved a motion in parliament about it, but nobody has. But they come in numbers to make sure that nobody should vote yes for LGBTs in Malawi. Now, these are issues, worrying issues. Why? Because we are debating at that level. The Malawian who is actually affected by these things is down there, and they don't participate in these things. So I feel that the NGO community, or the stakeholders in this area, should think about taking these issues down, other than just discussing them at parliamentary level, giving MPs money to vote against, when actually the people involved are not involved. So I want to appeal to those of us here with a bit of money. Come to Malawi. We have problems there, and started. Uganda has opened another can of worms. Again, that's another battlefield which we need to fight. So it's not just abortions anymore. There are many battles to fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, reminding us that beyond abortion, sexual reproductive rights and sexuality education, we see many other things now attacking reproductive, assisted reproduction procedures, everything. You're coming for the body, for people to not decide what happens to their body and the threat to autonomy. I'll come to you last, Irungu. We have been told that we need to get out of that conference room, from the parliamentary rooms. And I know you lead an organization that leads in civic space and citizen organizing. Yet we have seen the citizen hijacked. They have information that is false. We've seen disinformation. These groups are very good. They have WhatsApp groups with thousands of people on the continent spreading disinformation. How are we rethinking, recentering the rights of women and marginalized communities as a citizen issue, not just an issue of those communities?
So I think, it occurs to me that in 2023, compared to the time that I came out of university back in 1990, that things have fundamentally changed, right? So if you were not engaged in social media and digital organizing, it is actually difficult to reach people. It's often we say that there are actually 4 types of people who dominate narratives in a country, and all of them seem to have started with the letter P. So it's either politicians who can organize large rallies, usually sometime with allowances. It's also pop stars, musicians. It is PR agents, people who design very clever mass media campaigns, and it is preachers, right? So these are all the 4 that do this. And often I ask my colleagues within the NGO sector, because it does occur to me that the NGO model is dead, and we just haven't pronounced it dead, because we have relied on a form of power that is no longer of interest to those in power, which is expert knowledge, evidence-based analysis, and so on. The very naked side of power now is the extent to which you are able to create a popular movement or a popular narrative that will give politicians some political capital. So I think that's where the point about going to the ground makes sense. And for Amnesty International Kenya, we have invested now almost entirely on movement building, which is membership development, supporter-based development. We are struggling to reach people with different languages, different parts of the country, those with internet, those without internet. But we are very confident that that is actually the path of travel that most of us must travel. Professional associations, trade unions, women's groups, groups of young people. I think that is where the power is that will create the kind of tension that politicians will now have to listen to us rather than setting the agenda from their side. So I think for all of us here, to really look at what are the strategies, tactics, and mechanisms we're developing to be able to bring a collective voice on particular issues in a way in which it cannot be ignored. That is the only thing the politician understands, which is votes and the possibility of censure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding us where the work is. Thanks everyone on this panel for bringing such great insights to this issue. And I hope that we go back with this lesson that the struggle is on, and the struggle is not for just one community, but it affects us all. We keep thinking the margins are the ones affected until we see these things closer to us. Today in Parliament in Uganda, they passed a tax on adult diapers, and that stemmed from the conversation on homosexuality. They said it's homosexuals who use adult diapers. You cannot believe the level of conversation. And anyone who has had relatives with disability, elderly relatives, to look after somebody, the amount of money hiking that kind of tax is unacceptable. But the conversation has already been hijacked that this is about homosexuality. So anything passes. So it's very, very important that we go back to our communities, we go back to the people, and for them to understand what is really at play, because the forces have hijacked the media in different spaces, and it can be very difficult to see through this kind until it is too late. So thank you for reminding us what the struggle is and where we should take it. Thank you. I hope that we stayed within your time. I would like to hand over for the last session. Yes.
Here I am, ready.
Thank you.
Ooh, oopsie. Thank you very much for keeping the time. Another round of applause for our panel as they get off the stage.